My boss clicked to slide 12 and said, "We're selling your research." 23 faces turned toward me. My name wasn't on a single line. It was one of those Monday mornings that feel too sharp to be real. The fluorescent lights buzzing a half second out of sync with the projector, the air just cold enough to make everyone wrap their arms without realizing it. The conference room smelled like burnt coffee and stress. I sat near the end of the table, a few seats away from the screen, watching as my 12 months of experiments, models, and sleepless debugging sessions, was reduced to a 3-word bullet point. Project Orchid, proprietary AI optimization. The logo at the top was ours. The data on the right wasn't. He spoke like a man rehearsed to perfection, confident, polished, every word smoothed of doubt. "This," he said, gesturing to a cluster of metrics that looked hauntingly familiar, "is the foundation of our upcoming partnership. It's a strategic IP sale. Expected valuation, mid-9 figures." Laughter, applause, a few impressed murmurs. I didn't clap. I just stared at the accuracy of the graphs, down to the decimals. They were mine, even the rounding errors. I tried to swallow, but my throat refused to cooperate. "Before we move on," said the CFO, flipping the page, "let's credit the team for their dedication, especially our technical leadership." He nodded to my boss, not me. Someone glanced at me out of pity. Another mouthed, "What the hell?" I smiled faintly, the kind of smile you wear at funerals. When the slide deck advanced again, I noticed something odd. The timestamps on the image exports. They were from a folder I'd locked behind a 2-factor protected workspace. I'd created it for an internal demo months ago, restricted to 3 people. He wasn't one of them. "Any questions before we proceed?" he asked. My hand almost twitched. I could have said yes, just one. "Who authorized you to sell what you didn't build?" But I didn't, not yet. The room wasn't the place for honesty. It was the place for witnesses. He pointed at the next slide, the vision roadmap. There it was again, the algorithm's architecture stripped of context, relabeled as optimized neural pathways via Orchid framework. A fancy way of saying he'd rebranded my work with a new name and his initials at the bottom of the citation list. Someone asked about the tech stack. He dodged it expertly. Someone else asked about validation. He said, "We have internal benchmarks from our senior data scientist." That was me. I wasn't senior anymore, apparently. When the meeting ended, people began filtering out, some whispering, others pretending not to notice me at all. My boss stopped near the door, clapped me lightly on the shoulder, and said, "Appreciate your support during this phase. Let's sync after, yeah?" The word support echoed like a punch. Support. As if I were the intern who fetched his coffee, not the one who'd built the backbone of the entire system he was now monetizing. I waited until the last person left. Then I scrolled through my inbox. There it was, a meeting invite sent late last night, titled M&A Prep, Confidential. I wasn't on it, but one of the attached reference docs, buried deep in a chain of forwarded messages, had been authored under my credentials, stripped of metadata, and exported from my drive. He'd copied, resaved, renamed. I didn't panic. I didn't storm into his office. I simply forwarded that invite to my personal account, with one note to myself in the body. Timeline discrepancy. Check later. Perfectly benign, perfectly legal, but crucial. As I walked back to my desk, the hallway felt longer than usual. Screens glowed behind glass walls. Code scrolling, charts updating, lives moving forward, as if mine hadn't just been erased in a sentence. I sat down, opened the internal repo, and checked access logs. My heart sank. A new user group had been added over the weekend. Orchid Admin Temp. Admin privileges. 4 members, 3 familiar names, and one that wasn't supposed to exist. It was his personal email, alias. I stared at the monitor until the letters blurred. Then I leaned back, breathed once, twice, and forced calm into my body. I thought of every time he'd told me, "Trust me, I'll make sure you're covered." Every late night, every presentation draft I'd shared for alignment, and now he'd aligned it right out of my hands. That afternoon, he passed my desk, all smiles. "Hey, champ, great energy this morning. Keep focusing on model tuning. We'll need stability metrics by Friday." I nodded. "Sure thing." My voice was steady. My pulse wasn't. The rest of the team joked around Slack about bonuses and exit rumors. I typed 3 words in the private draft I'd kept open since morning. "Don't forget everything." That night, when the building was empty, I stayed behind. I opened the audit logs again and exported them. Nothing proprietary, just access metadata, timestamps, user IDs, enough to remember how the theft had looked in numbers. Then I shut down my terminal, grabbed my backpack, and walked out into the quiet street. It was raining lightly, the kind of drizzle that blurs the reflections of streetlights. I pulled up my hood and looked at the window of the top floor, where the exec offices still glowed. One shadow moved inside, tall, confident, the outline of a man who thought the world couldn't see through glass. He was wrong. By the end of that week, everyone in the company would know there was something off about Project Orchid. They just didn't know it yet, and I wasn't going to stop them from finding out. You don't notice a theft when the thief uses your keyboard. That was the thought that kept looping in my head the next morning, sitting at my desk with a paper cup of burnt coffee and a spreadsheet that suddenly looked meaningless. For almost a year, my life had revolved around a single project, a model I'd built from scratch to optimize data pathways for real-time learning. It wasn't glamorous work. It wasn't the kind of thing that trended on LinkedIn, but it was mine. Every bug, every half-working version, every small victory at 2:47 a.m. was mine. Now it had a new name, a new owner, and apparently a billion-dollar valuation. The irony? I still had the Slack messages. Messages like, "Hey, can you clean up the feature library? Don't worry, I'll handle the presentation." Or, "Let's keep commits under my branch for now. It looks cleaner for investors." Cleaner. That word stung now. I opened the main repository and started scrolling through the logs. There they were. Hundreds of comments, each tagged with my initials. Each comment a breadcrumb from the sleepless nights I'd spent building a thing no one believed in. Fixed gradient vanish in v3.2. Added dynamic scaling. Stability 92%. Every note was a heartbeat. I'd written some of them half asleep, hunched over my keyboard, fueled by vending machine coffee and the kind of stubborn belief that someday someone would notice. And someone did. My boss. He'd noticed the exact moment the model crossed the 90% threshold. That was when he started hovering more, checking in at odd hours, offering to review architecture or optimize documentation. He'd never touched the code before. He didn't need to. All he needed was to be there when it worked. I remembered that night perfectly. It was a Friday in March. The office was empty except for the hum of air conditioning and the flicker of my monitor. When the model finally ran clean, no error messages, no memory leaks, just perfect output, I sat there in the dark and laughed. It was the kind of laugh that comes out half-choked, half-relieved. He came in 5 minutes later, holding his phone like he'd been waiting outside. "You got it?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah, it's stabilized," he smiled. "Brilliant. Let's get this in the demo build. You've just changed everything, you know that?" I believed him. I really did. Over the next few months, he became my biggest supporter, or so I thought. He scheduled weekly syncs to help streamline documentation, encouraged me to record every step for transparency, and insisted we use a shared folder so leadership could track progress. I didn't realize that folder mirrored automatically into a private directory with his access token attached. It was subtle. A few renamed files, some metadata stripped away. The design doc I'd written, a 20-page technical breakdown signed and time-stamped, reappeared in a new folder as Orchid Framework V1 Draft. Author. M. Carter. That was him. The first time I noticed, I told myself it was a mistake. The second time, I told myself I'd fix it later. By the third, I stopped pretending. I kept everything. Every version, every log. I started printing the critical sections of my lab notebook again. Old school, pen and paper, date and signature on each page. I even used the tamper-evident tape from our compliance cabinet to seal the binding just like they taught us in university. It wasn't paranoia. It was survival. Because deep down, I knew he was planning something. The company had been talking for months about strategic partnerships and IP monetization. The kind of phrases that make engineers nervous and investors excited. I didn't think they'd use my research as the centerpiece of it, at least not without asking. But every Friday, another piece of my work disappeared into a new folder. By August, the repo looked like someone had gone through it with a scalpel, cutting out the core and leaving only the scraps. He was careful, though. He never deleted anything entirely. He just moved it. Refiled, renamed, reshuffled. The digital equivalent of laundering authorship. One night, I stayed late again. The cleaning crew had already turned off half the lights. I opened his private workspace, one I technically had read access to for collaboration. Inside, I found something called Investor Demo, Final.dtx. It was almost identical to my last internal deck, down to the chart design, except the title page read, Lead Architect M. Carter, Director of Research. Technical Support, J. Singh. That was me. Technical support. I remember staring at that line for a full minute before laughing out loud. It wasn't even anger at first. It was disbelief. The absurdity of watching your entire year rewritten as a footnote. I took a screenshot, then another. Then I stopped, realizing screenshots weren't enough. I copied the file metadata into a note, logged the access history, and sent it to myself. Again, perfectly legal, perfectly quiet. Over the next few days, I started noticing other things. Calendar blocks marked Orchid Investor Briefing, emails with subject lines like Deal Structure Draft that skipped my inbox entirely. People started acting differently, more polite, more cautious. Someone from finance stopped me in the hallway and said, "Congrats, by the way." I asked, "For what?" He looked confused. "Didn't you hear? They're saying your project's being acquired." They're saying. That's how rumors start. Small enough to ignore, big enough to become truth. At home, I couldn't sleep. My partner asked what was wrong. I said, "I think I'm being erased." She didn't understand what I meant until I showed her the slides. Her face went still. "You can't just let that happen," she said. I told her I wouldn't. But first, I needed proof. I started building a trail, quietly. An encrypted archive on a personal drive, nothing company confidential, just evidence of authorship, lab notes, email headers, Slack exports, even screenshots of commit hashes. I knew it might come to this someday. I just didn't think it would be this soon. 2 weeks later, he called me into his office. The glass walls made everything feel like a performance. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded. "I've noticed your focus slipping," he said. "You seem distracted." "I'm still delivering," I replied. He smiled, that slow managerial smile that never reaches the eyes. "Let's keep it that way. There's a lot riding on the next few weeks." When I left his office, I saw a new message pop up on my screen. Access revoked, Orchid repository. It was the final confirmation I needed. They'd locked me out of my own work, but I wasn't done, not even close. That night, I opened my private backup drive, scrolled through the folders, and hovered over a single file, one that could burn everything down if I ever chose to send it. I didn't click send. Not yet. Because something inside me whispered that the best revenge isn't sabotage, it's truth. And truth, when documented well enough, becomes undeniable. The deal room had my code, my metrics, and a user I'd never met approving them at 2:11 a.m. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was architecture. A theft engineered with the precision of the software itself. It started when I got copied, by mistake, on an internal chain about a due diligence request. The thread was 10 messages deep, buried between legal disclaimers and buzzwords. Most of it was jargon meant to look harmless, but a single line stood out like a splinter. Need verification of Orchid technical IP ownership. Confirm authorship documentation by Director of Research, M. Carter. My stomach twisted. They weren't just selling the tech. They were certifying his ownership of my code. I scrolled through the attachments. PDF summaries, screenshots of performance metrics, even benchmark graphs labeled with version numbers I recognized. Except one thing was missing. Every single authored by field. The metadata had been wiped clean. You don't erase metadata unless you have something to hide. That night, I logged into the company's cloud audit portal. The interface was sterile. Blue graphs, gray timelines, all silence and precision. I searched for Orchid. Hundreds of entries appeared, but one detail made my pulse spike. A folder labeled Investor Package, accessed at 2:11 a.m. by a user called Admin Ops SE. There was no such account in our directory. I checked the IP logs. It traced back to his home address. The man had literally stolen the system in his pajamas. For a few seconds, I just sat there, staring at the monitor's glow reflecting off the empty glass wall. My reflection looked calm, but my hands were shaking. I knew this could destroy me if I mishandled it. Accusing a senior director without evidence would make me the liability. But walking away meant giving up everything I'd built. So I did the one thing that couldn't be argued with. I started documenting, not whispering, not threatening, just writing down the truth. First, I exported a hash of the core code, the public cryptographic signature of the final build. Legal, safe, and time-stamped. I sent it to myself from my personal email, attaching nothing confidential, just the hash string and a single line. Generated by author of baseline model on current date. Then I printed my original research notebook, the one with the physical signature, the dated entries, the ink-stained pages that proved creation over time. Each page got notarized by the lab administrator under the research continuity clause we'd all signed years ago. It wasn't even unusual, just thorough. Every digital file, every changelog, every email chain went into a structured archive, each file labeled with context, not anger. It took me 4 nights. I didn't sleep. I didn't need to. I was running on a strange clarity, the kind that hits you when you realize the only way to fight manipulation is to make it visible. By the 5th day, I knew the layout of the scheme better than he did. Here's what I uncovered. 1. He'd created a shell consulting company, an LLC registered 3 months earlier under his cousin's name. 2. That company had a subcontract agreement with our firm, authorizing strategic IP evaluation for Project Orchid. 3. The agreement listed himself as consulting advisor. 4. The contract explicitly allowed revenue participation on intellectual assets developed under his guidance. My work wasn't stolen, it was laundered. He'd structured a pipeline where the ownership of my research flowed into a private entity, which then fed it back to the company under his consulting rights. On paper, it looked legitimate. On paper, it looked like the company was buying from him, not from me. And it almost worked. The only flaw was arrogance. He'd used the same phrasing in the shell contract that he used in internal memos. Architectural leadership for adaptive optimization layers. A phrase I had coined months before. I'd even used it in a recorded team meeting, my voice saying those exact words. That was my fingerprint. But the real turning point came 2 weeks later when I got a message from someone I didn't know. Lydia, Associate Counsel, North Star Ventures, acquiring partner. The subject line was polite enough. Clarification on technical authorship. The body of the email, though, read like a detonator. We're reviewing documentation for Orchid's IP chain. Your name appears in Comet records not reflected in leadership materials. Could you please confirm your involvement and whether you retain any independent authorship or patent rights? I stared at it for a long time. She was giving me a choice, to stay silent and let them buy the lie, or to answer honestly and let the truth tear through the deal. I answered, calmly, precisely, and fully within policy. I can confirm I'm the primary author of the baseline model architecture, referenced as ORCID. All work performed under employment contract. Documentation available through internal repos. Happy to provide timestamps and commit references. No emotion, no accusations, just facts. I CC'd the company's compliance inbox because transparency is a sword and a shield. Within hours, I got a reply. Not from her, but from our general counsel. Please refrain from further external correspondence until we align internally. Translation, we're in trouble. That evening, my boss stopped by my desk, wearing his practiced casual smile. Hey, heard you've been chatting with legal. Everything good? I looked up at him and said, everything's documented. For the first time, he blinked. Documented. Yeah, I said softly. Everything. The silence between us stretched. I could almost hear the gears turning behind his calm expression, trying to decide if I was bluffing. He finally said, be careful with your tone, okay? We're all on the same team here. I smiled. That's what the documentation says. That night, I got locked out of 3 internal folders. The next morning, HR scheduled a routine check-in. By lunch, the buyer's diligence team requested direct access to the primary author. Me. The shell game was cracking. I didn't leak. I didn't threaten. I just answered questions, meticulously, factually, and in writing. Each truth I sent out came back amplified. Each documented timestamp made their story unravel a little more. The board started asking questions they should have asked months ago. The CFO asked for verification of foundational authorship. The GC called me privately and said, I need you to stay professional, no matter what happens next. That's when I knew I wasn't fighting a man anymore. I was fighting a system of silence that had finally started to listen. And it was listening to me. I didn't leak anything. I just started answering every question like the room had cameras. When the buyer's diligence team requested direct contact, everything changed overnight. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. Every meeting invite included me. Every Slack channel that used to ignore my messages now pinged me twice. But behind the politeness, I could feel it. Tension, quiet panic threading through the walls of the company. The truth wasn't a secret anymore. It was a virus. By Monday morning, the board had ordered a verification audit. That's corporate for, we smell smoke. I sat through the first call, surrounded by names that usually existed 3 pay grades above me. The general counsel, the CFO, an outside attorney from a white shoe firm, and my boss, smiling, confident, sleeves rolled up like a man who thought he still owned the room. He started talking before anyone asked him to. Let's remember what's at stake here. This partnership could transform our valuation overnight. Let's not get distracted by authorship semantics. Authorship semantics. That's what my year of work had become. Semantics. The GC didn't smile. Michael, the buyer's legal team has raised concerns about attribution inconsistencies. They've requested confirmation of IP chain and contribution records. Michael, my boss, shrugged. We've already confirmed. All assets are under corporate ownership. I supervise the development. Then he turned to me. Right, Singh? He said it casually, but it wasn't a question. It was a trap. The kind that leaves you 2 wrong answers deep before you've opened your mouth. I didn't look at him. I looked straight into the webcam and said, all development was performed under company contract, yes. The authorship records are time-stamped and available in our internal repositories. Silence. He blinked once, realizing I had answered truthfully without covering his lie. The CFO cleared his throat. Let's get those logs, please. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the office shifted. Michael stopped making small talk. Meetings were suddenly executive only. The ORCID Slack channel went quiet, archived without notice. Someone from HR stopped by my desk to ask about my well-being. I told her I was fine. She smiled the way people do when they're not sure if you're a whistleblower or a grenade. That Wednesday, I got a message from the buyer's junior counsel, Lydia, again. Thank you for your earlier clarification. We'd like to include you in the upcoming diligence Q&A session. Please prepare to review technical validation reports. It was the most professional email I'd ever received. It also made my hands shake, because that session was where everything would either fall apart or finally align. The night before the call, I did something that would change everything. I published a preprint, not a leak, not a secret. A public, legally compliant preprint describing a generalized method of adaptive optimization, the theoretical foundation of the ORCID framework. I scrubbed every trace of company data, every internal reference. What remained was pure science, algorithmic architecture, pseudocode, mathematical proofs. It was enough to establish prior art, a digital timestamp that said, this concept existed here, authored by this person on this date. I didn't tell anyone. I just uploaded it under my name. That night, I barely slept. When I finally drifted off, I dreamed of code, of numbers cascading like rain, erasing lies 1 decimal at a time. The diligence call started at 9 a.m. sharp. The first 30 minutes were standard corporate theater, executives thanking each other, lawyers trading legalese. Then the buyer's CTO, a quiet man with wireframe glasses, shared his screen. Before we move forward, he said, we need clarity on technical authorship. Some of the internal documentation contradicts itself. Mr. Singh, could you walk us through how the ORCID framework originated? My throat went dry. Michael leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like a man watching a tightrope act. I began carefully. The framework began as an experimental branch for data compression efficiency. I initiated the first comets in February last year. It evolved into a stability optimization model with documented iterations in the repository. All contributions are traceable by Comet ID. I pulled up the audit trail I'd exported weeks ago. Hashes, timestamps, Git IDs, each one verifiable. The buyer's CTO leaned in. These correspond to the metrics in the investor deck? Yes, I said. And who authored those commits? I did. A beat of silence. Then the CFO coughed nervously. All of this falls under company property, of course, the CTO interrupted. Of course. We're only confirming the attribution. We can't finalize an acquisition without a clean IP chain. Translation. If they can't prove ownership, the deal dies. I glanced at Michael. For the first time since I'd known him, his face wasn't confident. It was calculating. A man realizing his house of cards had a foundation made of someone else's name. After the call, I went back to my desk and exhaled for the first time in hours. My inbox exploded. Internal messages, HR pings, legal requests. The GC wanted a private chat. The CFO scheduled an alignment meeting. Everyone was suddenly very interested in the truth they'd ignored for a year. That afternoon, Lydia called me directly. Her voice was calm but sharp. Mr. Singh, we've reviewed your documentation. We also found your preprint. My chest tightened. It's purely theoretical, I said quickly. I know, she replied, and it's perfectly legal. But it's also time-stamped, which means any misrepresentation of authorship could void exclusivity rights in this sale. She paused. Your boss must be panicking? I didn't answer. I didn't have to. By the end of that week, an emergency board meeting was scheduled. Rumors spread through the halls like electricity. The buyer had paused the transaction pending a full IP review. The phrase chain of title discrepancy appeared in internal memos. HR circulated a reminder about ethics compliance. Michael cornered me in the parking lot that night. The sky was dark, the kind of darkness that eats sound. He said, "You're risking the deal. You realize that?" I looked at him. "No, I'm protecting the truth." He stepped closer. "If this falls apart, no one wins." "Then maybe it was built on the wrong foundation," I said quietly. He didn't respond. He just walked away, his reflection fracturing across the wet asphalt. The next morning, I found my office access card deactivated. HR called it a technical glitch, but an hour later, an email arrived from the GC. Please remain available for questions during the board review. You are not under investigation. That last sentence told me everything I needed to know. I wasn't the one being investigated anymore. He was. By the end of the week, the buyer's legal team added a new condition to the acquisition draft. Key personnel retention, Jay Singh. They wanted me on the deal, not him. And for the first time since this started, I smiled. Not out of victory, but relief. Because sometimes the only way to turn on the lights is to stop being afraid of what they'll show. He said, "You're risking the deal." I said, "No, your version of it." By the time the emergency board session began, the tension in the room felt physical, like static before a lightning strike. The blinds were drawn. Laptops were open, but no one typed. The company's general counsel sat at the head of the table, hands folded, voice steady but lethal. "Before we start," she said, "I want to remind everyone this meeting is being recorded." Michael, my boss, didn't flinch. He wore his favorite navy jacket, the one he saved for investor demos. To anyone else, he looked calm. To me, he looked cornered. The GC began, "We've reviewed the external counsel's findings. The buyer has identified inconsistencies in our IP documentation and requested full traceability for Orchid. Mr. Singh, thank you for cooperating with diligence." My pulse quickened. She turned to him. "Michael, can you explain why the sidecar entity, O'Brien Consulting LLC, appears as a recipient of IP transfer fees linked to this transaction?" He shifted just slightly. "That's a vendor. We use them for data structuring." She cut him off. "You own it." Silence. The CFO cleared his throat. "We've verified through state filings. Orion Consulting was incorporated under your cousin's name, with you listed as authorized agent. The same entity appears in our vendor list as an IP advisory consultant. It's been billing us for months." Michael blinked. "Once, twice. That's absurd. I delegated." The GC leaned forward. "And those invoices reference strategic leadership for Orchid Framework, with your digital signature." He froze. For the first time since this began, I saw it, the flicker of panic behind his eyes. Not fear of exposure. Fear of consequence. He wasn't used to anyone holding the line long enough for the truth to surface. The GC looked at me next. "Mr. Singh, can you verify the timeline of development?" I nodded. "Initial commits began February last year. Repository history is intact. Hash verification matches all subsequent builds. Authorship can be cross-checked against company-issued credentials." I spoke calmly, clinically, like a scientist presenting data, not a man defending his life's work. The outside counsel added, "We've confirmed Mr. Singh's documentation aligns with the earliest proof of concept. The Orchid framework, as represented in the sale materials, derives from that original codebase. Authorship attribution was altered in subsequent drafts." Altered? Such a clean word for what he'd done. Michael tried to laugh it off. "This is all a misunderstanding. You know how these things look when lawyers—" The CFO slammed a folder onto the table. "Enough. We nearly signed a $3.7 billion deal based on falsified authorship. Do you understand what that means for our liability?" The air left the room. The GC looked at him one last time. "Michael, step out for a moment, please." He hesitated, then stood. When the door shut behind him, no one spoke for a full minute. The silence felt holy. Finally, the board chair said, "What are our options?" The GC outlined them. 1. Cancel the sale. Lose the valuation. Face potential lawsuits. 2. Repaper the deal. Correct authorship. Reassign IP ownership transparently, and remove any individual implicated in misrepresentation. The CFO looked at me. "Would you stay on to oversee diligence if we restructure?" I swallowed. "Yes." And just like that, the floor shifted. By noon, the buyer's legal team had been looped in. Lydia joined the video call, her tone crisp, We're willing to proceed under one condition, she said. The IP chain must be certified under the true author's supervision. Mr. Carter is to be removed from deal leadership. The board agreed unanimously. When Michael was called back in, he looked around the table, smiling as if expecting an apology. The GC's voice was flat. Effective immediately, you're relieved of all responsibilities related to Orchid. HR will coordinate your transition. His smile faltered. You're firing me? No, she said. We're protecting the company. He turned to me. You did this. I met his eyes. No, you did this when you erased my name. For a second, he looked like he might lunge across the table. Instead, he laughed. Short, brittle. You think they'll let you take credit? You're naive. They'll use you too. Maybe, I said, but at least they'll know my name when they do. He stormed out. The door clicked shut behind him, soft as a period. The next 48 hours were chaos. Lawyers redrafting contracts, compliance teams tracing every commit, executives scrambling to reframe the narrative. But amid the storm, something incredible happened. People started talking to me differently, not like a cog or a coder, but like a peer. The buyer's CTO called me directly. We'd like you to lead the technical diligence. If we repaper this, you'll be listed as co-founder of the carved-out subsidiary. I stared at the phone. Co-founder? Yes. The valuation stands. We just need to ensure the right names are on the term sheet. The deal that had almost buried me was now being rebuilt around me. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just worked. For 72 hours straight, I lived on black coffee and adrenaline, combing through every data set, every line of code, every document that could prove the story clean. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was reclamation. On the third night, Lydia sent a final draft for review. The document's title read, Acquisition Agreement, Project Orchid, Revised Authorship and Governance. I scrolled through until I saw it. Lead author and technical director, Jay Singh, original IP contributor, confirmed by audit, timestamp chain verified, and below, in smaller print, former director of research, M. Carter, removed due to compliance breach. My hands trembled. Not from anger, from relief. The next morning I walked into the boardroom for signatures. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, executives smiled like it was just another transaction. Michael wasn't there. He'd been escorted out the previous night after HR concluded its review. Word was he'd tried to delete files from his laptop. It recovered everything in under an hour. When the last signature dried, the GC leaned toward me and said quietly, It's poetic, isn't it? The same documentation he used to steal your work just proved it was yours. I nodded. Truth leaves better metadata. The wire hit 2 days later, $3.7 billion. The company rebranded the product line, and the press release named me as co-founder and CTO of the new unit. My inbox filled with congratulations from people who'd avoided me for months. I answered politely, nothing more. Late that night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the first graph I'd ever generated for Orchid, the one with the messy margins and the handwritten notes in the corner. I printed it, framed it, and hung it on the wall above my desk. Because no matter how high the valuation climbed, that chart was the real victory. Proof that persistence outlasts politics, and that sometimes the system can be forced to tell the truth. Somewhere out there, I knew he was watching the headlines. Maybe he felt anger, maybe regret, maybe nothing at all. But it didn't matter anymore. The deal was done. The lie was dead. And for the first time in a year, I slept. When the wire hit, I wasn't in his victory photo. I was in the term sheet. The morning the transaction closed, the office was unrecognizable. Polished floors, espresso carts, executives in suits that finally looked slightly too small for their egos. Photographers floated between glass conference rooms, snapping smiles for the company newsletter. A new era of innovation. The irony didn't even sting anymore. It just existed, like a scar that had turned into skin. I watched from the corner as the CFO shook hands with the buyers, cameras flashing around them. For months, this had been the stage where I was told to stay quiet, stay supportive, stay aligned. Now my name was on the dotted line, right under lead author, CTO, co-founder. Michael wasn't there. HR had escorted him out a week earlier. Quietly, no press release, no goodbye email. He'd tried to bluff one last time, claiming intellectual contribution rights. The compliance team countered with timestamps, Slack archives, and his own sidecar invoices. When he realized he'd been outmaneuvered, he signed a separation agreement and walked away with nothing but the echo of his own arrogance. The deal closed at $3.7 billion. You'd think that number would feel like triumph. It didn't. It felt like balance, like the universe, for once, had decided to do its math properly. 2 days later, I got an email from the buyer's general counsel. Mr. Singh, on behalf of North Star Ventures, we'd like to acknowledge your professionalism throughout this process. You've handled yourself with integrity under extraordinary circumstances. We look forward to building with you. It was short, dry, perfect. I printed it and pinned it next to my desk, not out of pride, but because it was proof that calm can be louder than rage. The following week, I moved into the new office of the carved-out subsidiary. The Innovation Division, they called it. There was a new logo on the door, but inside, the space smelled the same. Coffee, ozone, and the faint trace of cold ambition. The difference was the silence. For the first time, it was a silence that belonged to me. I hired back the people who'd actually done the work. The ones who'd stayed loyal, even when the air got dangerous. The junior dev who caught the model crash at 3 a.m., the data analyst who flagged the missing commits, the intern who kept asking why the changelog looked different. They all got raises, new titles, and one rule. Transparency was no longer optional. We rebuilt the team culture line by line. Weekly stand-ups weren't about deliverables. They were about ownership. Every data set was open, every contribution tracked, every credit visible. If you built something, your name was on it. No negotiation. The investors loved it. Authenticity, apparently, was a selling point now. But behind the corporate gloss, there was something deeper. The team moved differently. Slower, steadier, like people who knew the cost of silence. When someone got praise, we clapped. When someone made a mistake, we fixed it. No more ghosts in the code. A month later, during a product briefing, the buyer's CTO pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "when this started, we assumed you'd be difficult. Most people in your position lose control." I smiled. "I almost did." He nodded. "You didn't. That's rare." That night, after everyone left, I stayed behind. The building was quiet, lights humming in rows, shadows long across the floor. I walked to the far end of the lab, the one corner that still had the old server rack from the original office. My old workstation sat there, dusty but intact. On the screen, Savor, the old Orchid prototype logo. I opened the folder labeled Legacy. Inside were the early simulation graphs, the first raw datasets, and a single JPEG, the whiteboard photo from the night it all began. My handwriting covered every inch of it, messy and urgent, with arrows looping over formulas and the words, "It works," scribbled at the bottom. I hadn't looked at it since the day he sold my name off that slide. Now I printed it, same as before, framed it next to the original ablation chart. 2 frames, side by side, the beginning and the proof. Above them, a small brass plate with a single line I had engraved myself. For every silent engineer who built something worth stealing. A few weeks later, someone from HR sent me a confidential file, Michael's official termination report. I didn't ask for it. They sent it anyway. I opened it out of curiosity. It was 1 page long. Reason for separation. Ethics breach, unauthorized external IP entity, and falsification of authorship records. No adjectives, no excuses. Just a bureaucratic epitaph for a man who'd believed the truth was negotiable. The irony didn't escape me. The same system he manipulated had written his downfall in corporate language. Karma doesn't always come with drama. Sometimes it arrives as a PDF with perfect formatting. Months passed. The new project soared. We filed new patents, launched pilots, got invited to conferences. People called me a visionary. I corrected them every time. I wasn't a visionary. I was a witness. A witness to what happens when you document, when you refuse to be erased quietly. Every time I spoke to new engineers, I told them the same thing. Take notes, save logs, keep dates. Don't assume credit will protect itself. Truth fades if you don't leave a trail. Some smiled politely. Others really listened. And sometimes late at night, I'd think about him. The man who thought he could own what he didn't build. I wondered if he ever understood what he'd lost. Not the money, not the title, but the legacy, the quiet respect that comes from creation. Maybe he didn't. Maybe that was the real punishment. Because at the end of everything, the lawsuits, the billion-dollar headlines, the applause, all that really mattered was that the work survived, and it did, under my name, with every signature, every citation, every line of code intact. When people ask how I felt seeing my name in the official papers, I tell them the truth. I didn't feel proud. I felt accurate. And accuracy, after a year of silence, feels like justice. Before I left that night, I turned off the lights in the lab. The hum of the servers faded, leaving only the echo of the city outside. Rain against glass, cars passing in rhythm. For the first time, I didn't look back. Because this wasn't his story anymore. It was finally mine.